Started up Badlands. Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
Good evening. Today is Black Monday, the day the Dow dropped more than 500 points. Today the Dow dropped more than 22%.
Everybody's panic. Everyone's in panic. Everybody, we're trying to find a bottom.
1929. But this crash in 1987 is not just an American experience. Around the world, stock markets fell faster than a skydiver without a parachute.
What we have to confront is a deep, systemic, and structural restructuring of our world. And this will take some time. And the world will look differently after we have gone through this transition process.
For centuries, they've been stuffing their stomachs with human flesh, and they've been stuffing their pockets with money. But they must realize that this bowl of vampires is about to end. But the common people of these countries in their heart, they can feel what's happening. They can see our struggle for our independence, for our true sovereignty. And they see this connection with their aspirations to be truly independent, which is exacerbated by the fact that in the Western elites there is a strong desire to freeze the current unfair state of things in international affairs.
Well, let me tell you something, brother. When they took a shot at my hero, and they tried to kill the next President of the United States, enough was enough. And I said, let Trumpomania run wild, brother. Let Trumpomania rule again. Let Trumpomania make America great again.
People who don't believe are walking dead. They are asleep, and this is the awakening.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Book of Trump, Chapter 14. I'm your host, Gordon McCormick, Ghost of Base Patrick Henry. Tonight, we have a real special treat for you. We are going to be discussing maneuver warfare, which is a topic and term that you probably have heard Burning Bright talk about many times. I have mentioned it. And rather than me do it, we're going to bring on a special guest. But before I get to there, let's go ahead and give a shout out and thank you to our sponsor, and that would be River. River announces Bitcoin interest on cash. Now US dollars in your River account will earn a high yield interest rate that can be paid in Bitcoin. With the price of groceries, mortgage, and the tuition on a steep rise, people are now looking at a retirement age of 80 instead of 60. And it's all because dollars are losing value at a record pace. The challenge is finding a way to hold onto your dollar with while still getting ahead. That's where River Bitcoin comes in. River Bitcoin's interest on cash protects your dollars with FDIC insurance while offering you the option to re-app the potential gains of Bitcoin. Over the past 2 years, you would have earned 2x or 2 times the rate of most high-yield savings accounts and 16 times the rate of the national average savings account with Bitcoin interest on cash. Get started at badlandsmedia.tv/river. Move your cash to River today and start earning a real interest rate with Bitcoin. That's badlandsmedia.tv/river. And thank you, River, for your support. All right. So tonight we are going to be joined by rather than listening to me talk about maneuver warfare as a layman, because I've never served in the military, we're going to bring on an experienced warfighter and military leader, and that would be our good friend, Lieutenant Colonel Oakland McCulloch. Oak, thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
I'm doing really well, Ghost. I'm looking forward to this show. I talk about leadership all the time on shows. I haven't gotten to talk about military stuff in a while, so this is going to be fun.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it too. You and I have had a few conversations prior to this, and as I told you, I started going down these rabbit holes about the origins of maneuver warfare about maybe a year ago, last summer, when the reports of the M1 Abrams tanks being deployed to Ukraine were surfacing. And it's so fascinating, especially the stuff that you've sent me that I've read, these articles that gave me more source documents to go into. And as you read into the actual literature, and it gives you the lexicon, and seeing it all articulated on paper by the military, and some of this stuff was written 45 years ago, and it just feels so applicable to the modern day, like the modern era.
Yeah, I think maneuver warfare, it got its start probably during the Austro-Prussian War back in 1866, but it's evolved since then, and it certainly is, like any strategy, any principles, that they evolve as warfare, not just warfare, but as the scenario, the situation evolves. And if you want to keep up, it's got to evolve to handle whatever's going on in the world at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. And just based on some of to kind of kick it off, based on what you had sent me, and I went and grabbed just a few visuals for people to understand. And as you and I discussed, and as was written in some of these pamphlets, these military pamphlets, maneuver warfare has been around since the dawn of warfare in some capacity. It just was more, I guess, created as a doctrine around the time that you mentioned in the 19th century. But some of the big significant developments that it mentioned was Maurice of Orange and Gustavus Adolphus. These two guys who lived in the 16th century both seem to develop two pretty significant developments to military planning and strategy and organization. Maurice, it says, he created the professional standing army for the Dutch Republic. He got away from these like large pike squares where you had guys with pikes and squares, and moved and organized into lines. Reintroduced strict discipline training, practicing maneuvers, going back to more of like what they were doing in ancient Rome in terms of training sequence, siege warfare, fortifications. This other guy, Gustavus Adolphus, he seems like he was more of the maneuver warfare guy, where he really prioritized highly mobile armies and introducing artillery and combined arms tactics, light infantry, light artillery, shock cavalry. And so it kind of breaks it down into like the two big differences. In short, it says Maurice made the armies more better organized, disciplined, and steady, while Gustavus made armies faster, more aggressive, and more integrated. And I guess the thing that really stuck out to me was one of the pamphlets, the source documents that was cited in one of the articles you had sent me, was that in MCDP pamphlet, the warfighting pamphlet, and I know this is Marines and your Army, so I know that there's FM30 you said was the Army one, but this is the one that I ended up digging into because it was cited in the article. But there was something interesting there where they mentioned, they explained it like a spectrum, and they basically said that on one end of the spectrum you had what they called attrition warfare, which I think is the more traditional idea of just two guys with each one has a stick. One of them has a bigger stick, and it's just brute force, and one of them is going to overpower the other one in a head-on collision. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have maneuver warfare, which is where you're going to start to employ deception and movement and feigns and you know, where you land on one end of the spectrum versus the other is more of a I guess a case by case analysis, and part of the conversation I want to have tonight, because I think that's really applicable. Even though this is all talking about kinetic warfare, I think that's where we can start to apply it to the psychological fifth generation stuff.
Yeah, I agree. And, I guess one of the places to start is just the definition of what maneuver warfare is, because that term gets thrown out there a lot, and I'm not sure that everybody understands what it really means. And so the definition of maneuver warfare, it's a military strategy that really prioritizes movement, initiative, and surprise to gain an advantage over your enemy. And that has not always been our doctrine in the American Army. Right after the Second World War, during the beginnings of the Cold War, we were on a very defensive strategy. Make them come to us because they outnumbered us so much. But maneuver warfare is a very offensive oriented strategy, and the American Army moved into that about 1986, and that FM1 that you showed with Lind, that, I'm an Army guy, but I still have that book. That was our Bible when I was a lieutenant. I had a colonel, my battalion commander was a huge believer in maneuver warfare, and he bought a copy of that for every one of his lieutenants and captains in the battalion. And I still have my copy, and it's got notes in it and everything else. So, I mean, that even though that's a Marine Corps manual, that came out before then it was FM 100-5 operations manual when I was a lieutenant. And that was air-land battle, which was the Army moving to a maneuver type strategy rather than the defensive strategy that we were on. But after World War I until 1986, or after World War II till 1986.
Yeah, that's also fascinating. And so what inspired, or I guess kind of drove me to think about putting this episode together was an article that you had written that I found on I believe was it on the M1 Abrams tank years ago.
Right. I was a basic training company commander at Fort Knox, and I was training brand new recruits to be tankers, to drive, to be gunners, to be loaders in the M1 tank.
Yeah. And so like just reading that article, it just made me realize, because in the article you mentioned maneuver warfare, and I was just sitting there thinking, I was like, man, Oak has lived this. He's taught it. It's been his profession, and this is such a perfect opportunity to have this conversation. So yeah, if you could maybe just give us a little bit of insight into the M1 and your understanding of it, and how tank warfare kind of changed the game in maneuver warfare.
Yeah, so I mean, tanks have been around since World War I, but tanks originally were nothing more than infantry support, following the infantry or leading the infantry to clear the next trench. That's really what they were used for. Lots of times they were just pillboxes. They parked somewhere and just fired their guns in support of the infantry. And that really changed in World War II with the German army. They were the ones who really introduced maneuver warfare with blitzkrieg, as many of us have heard that term. And that was really maneuver warfare, trying to pit your strength against their weakness, and at the same time preventing them from reinforcing that point that you want to go through. And like you said, through feints and demonstrations and those kinds of things, you do that. And so really, our tank in World War II was the Sherman, and really struggled in fighting against the German tanks. And it was General Abrams who was the Army secretary, the Secretary of the Army after he got done with Vietnam. and he was the one who really was the one who designed the M1 tank to be the tank it is. He said, our tankers will never be at a disadvantage on the battlefield again. And so originally the M1 tank was supposed to be only 35 tons, and it ended up 72 tons because of the armor that he put on it, the Chubam armor that he saw. And he said, that's what we want. And so, again, I've always believed in maneuver warfare since I was a lieutenant. I really got indoctrinated in that with my first battalion commander and my first company commander. And I wanted to make sure that the privates that I was training understood the concepts of mission-oriented orders, of terrain, use of terrain, to get the most out of that M1 tank. Because my philosophy was always this: those young men could leave my company, leave basic training, go out into their unit, and within a month, they could be deployed on a battlefield somewhere. So I looked at it as my responsibility to make sure that they were as prepared as possible to go out there and do it. And one of the things that I implemented in that basic training company and the whole battalion was we started taking them to the simulators, and the lieutenants and the captains, and sometimes the senior NCOs, because we didn't have as many officers as we needed, would be the tank commanders, telling them where to move and how to move on the battlefield. But it was those privates were they were the gunner, they were the driver, they were the loader, and so they got to actually see what maneuver warfare looks like in a simulator. But I will tell you, the simulator was pretty realistic. You got a pretty good feel for what that tank could do and how to use it to its most advantage.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you mentioned the armor, because that was a big like revolutionary aspect of the M1. From what I was reading, it was it also implemented a jet engine, like unlike previous tanks, which I think it used like a diesel engine. This has like a jet engine on it, which
a turbo. It's a turbo. I mean, when it starts, it sounds just like a jet engine starting, because it is, and it uses JP8, which is kind of a mix between aviation fuel and diesel fuel, just so it's not as explosive as jet fuel would be. But yeah. But it can also run on diesel. It can run on anything you want to put in it. It'll run on it.
Interesting. Yeah. And then I found this diagram and didn't see as much in terms of literature written about this. So I don't know how unique this is, but these looks like it's called the Central Spider. Is this something unique to the M1? This looks like some sort of like a magazine for the turret.
Yeah, so I'm not sure about the most modern today tanks from France and Britain and maybe even Russia. But when the M1 came out, it was the first tank that separated the ammunition from the crew. So there was a blast shield door that you had to manually open it with a button, basically you pushed, and it would open. You'd pull out the round and it would close. It closes automatically. And that whole design was so that if the tank was hit and the ammunition was hit, that all the explosion would go up out of the tank instead of into the tank and kill the crew. And it works. I mean, I've seen tank fires where the ammunition was cooking off in the first Gulf War. It was just an accident. That wasn't in combat, but it was an accident, and all the explosion was going straight up instead of into the turret.
Yeah, I recall last year reading about when I went like the deep dive and on like the tank history. What is it? Is it the T-54s? Those are the ones the Soviets used in World War II. They
used the T-34.
T-34 was their main battle. Yeah, and it was saying that they were, they could mass produce them and they could churn them out. But man, those things were death traps because they were sitting right on the ammunition, and you could always tell that it had been struck a certain way because the turret would like pop off like a Jack in the Box, and it was like very, very dangerous for the crew because of that.
Yeah, well, it was that same way in the first Gulf War. They were using T-64s and T-72s, but the ammunition was in the floor underneath the crew. That's where they stored it. And the first Leopard tanks for the Germans, the Leopard 1 had the same thing. I got in one when I was stationed in Germany, and you look down and there's all the rounds pointing right back up at you. Kind of scary.
Yeah.
But when we would hit a tank in the first Gulf War, the turret would every time the turret would blow off, almost every time.
Interesting. Yeah. And, one of the things that you and I discussed before the show and certainly came up in my research over the past year was one of the aspects of the doctrine of maneuver warfare that is really interesting to me, and you had said is a game changer, is like the decentralization of command and being able to give the initiative to your field commanders, to your lower junior officers. You give them a conceptual understanding of what your end game is. You say, here's where I want to end up. And if you never speak to them again between now and the end of the mission, they at least understand how to get there, and they don't have to come running back to you to ask for permission to do every little move. They can take the initiative and go complete the objectives as they see fit to achieve the mission. Could you tell us more about that and how that changes the game?
Yeah, again, the Germans in World War II came up with this thing that they call mission intent orders. So, you come up with a plan, but when you as an officer is briefing that plan to the other officers and soldiers, it's a mission intent. So you say, this is at the end of this operation, this is what I want it to look like. This is the plan on how I think we're going to get there. But, as I'm fond of saying, the enemy has a say. You can come up with the best plan in the world and the enemy still has a say. And that's not just in military, that's in everything. That's in business, that's everything. The enemy is defined differently, obviously, but the enemy has a say. And so if I got killed on the battlefield and I couldn't make decisions at times, or if I just lost comms or whatever, then my soldiers knew what it needed to look like at the end. And whatever situation on the ground, they knew they had permission to make decisions because they're the ones seeing what's in front of them. So they can make decisions that are the best to get us where we have to be at the end of this thing, my intent. And that is unique, or at least it has been for a long time, to the American Army in modern time. In World War II, the Germans implemented it and did one of the reasons they were so much faster in moving and doing things than certainly the Russians and even the Western powers, the British and the French and even the Americans, most of the Americans during World War II. And then we implemented it after World War II into our army, which that came about. The RAND Corporation did a series of interviews with high-ranking German generals that fought on the Eastern Front, trying to figure out what it was they did that worked, that made them so successful against the Russians, since we were facing the Russians during the Cold War, looking across Western Germany border to Eastern Germany and the Czechoslovakia and all along there, Poland and all those places. So we tried to use as much as we could from them, and the mission intent orders was one of those things that we implemented. And I've taught students from all over the world at our staff college and at the Australian staff college, and I would get asked quite often, what is it that makes the American Army so much better than other armies? And I always used to tell them, first of all, we have some pretty good equipment. That doesn't hurt. Number two, we train unlike any other army in the world. You know, we have this thing called the National Training Center out at Fort Irwin, California, and I was stationed there for 2 years. But I rotated out there as a player 4 times, I think. And when you're out there in the box, when you're out in the field, you're in the box, that is as real to combat as you are going to get without being in combat. I mean, it is that intense. And that is an advantage that we have over a lot of other countries that don't train that way. And then the last piece of it is this mission intent, where we have decentralized decision making, where in our army, sergeants can make decisions that in other armies, full bird colonels or generals are making those decisions. And it's got to go all the way up the chain, and then it's got to come all the way back the chain. By the time that happens, you're already behind you're overcome by events, probably. The events that you were trying to get permission to do probably don't mean anything anymore. Yeah. We saw that a lot in World War II on the Eastern Front. You know, the Germans were so much faster in executing because they could do it at the lower level. They didn't have to ask permission. If they saw an advantage, they took advantage of it. And so we implemented that in ours as well. And we might want to talk about the OODA loop cycle here at some point as well.
Absolutely. That's the next topic I want to get into. And I will mention as I mentioned before we went live, I do recall like 15 years ago, that being a narrative, like headline, that a lot of vets were complaining that Obama had like tried to invert that and made it like he wanted to micromanage everything, and he wanted to take away that decision making. He wanted everything run back up the chain before anything happened. And it was I just recall there being a lot of bitter resentment because of that, because I think it made the military less dynamic.
Oh, it does. It makes you less lethal, and it puts soldiers at risk. And we saw it, you know, and you don't remember this, I do, at the very tail end of it. The Vietnam War was the same way. Johnson was making decisions in the basement of the White House, deciding what to bomb and what not to bomb. You know, he's got no business making those kinds of decisions. That's what you have generals for. And then you let the soldiers on the ground who see what's going on in front of them make decisions. Again, give me my intent and my left and right limits. And as long as I stay inside those left and right limits, then I can get to the intent any way I see fit that comes up in front of me. And I think that again, just increases the amount of maneuverability, the amount of surprise you can do, the initiative you can take, all those things that maneuver warfare is designed to do. But you got to have that. You got to have that decentralized decision-making, or maneuver warfare doesn't work.
Yeah. And I would suppose that you'd also have to have quality junior officers and good training in order to be able to trust guys to be able to make those kind of decisions. So that's a testament to.
Well, you got to have
the caliber.
Right. You have to have well-trained officers. You have to have well-trained NCOs. You know, that are the backbone of our army is the NCO Corps. You know, I used to say when I took over a unit, I was renting that unit because I was only going to be there for a year, maybe 2 years. Those NCOs, that's their unit. They've been there for 4, 5, 6, 7, sometimes 10 years. That's their unit. I'm just renting it as the officer. And we do invest a lot of time in training our NCO Corps so they can make those decisions. If the officer is out of the picture for whatever reason, or if it just becomes available, if something comes up and they can make that decision, then make it. You know, again, the faster you can get that decision-making process working, the more you're going to keep the enemy off balance.
Yeah. His name escapes me. I want to say it was it Schellenberg, the guy the NCO who spoke out after the Afghanistan withdrawal. And I feel like a lot of the stuff he was saying was about that, about how the Joint Chiefs and the upper ranks needed to put the trust and faith into the junior officers to make the decisions and do what they were trained to do. So,
yeah. I agree. I mean, that's the only way you can. Again, if we don't want to do maneuver warfare, then we can do it however we want. But if you want to do maneuver warfare, you got to do mission intent orders, and you got to give the decision making process down to the lowest levels that makes sense. And that's what allows us to maneuver so much faster than our enemies on the battlefield.
Yeah, so let's talk about the decision making. Let's talk about Boyd and is it Oodala?
Ouda.
Ouda.
OODA.
OODA. Okay, yeah, I think I have that diagram pulled up, but if you want to explain it, I would love to get the inside baseball from you.
Yeah, and that was a huge part of the maneuver warfare piece as well. And just some background on Boyd, Colonel John Boyd, who was an Air Force, I believe he was an Air Force general or was a fighter pilot, and he fought in the Korean War. And so he was figuring out our planes weren't that much better than what the North Korean pilots were flying. They were flying Russian planes. And the MiG was shooting down a lot of the American planes. And so he came up with this, how do we make decisions faster than the enemy to put them at a disadvantage? And the whole thing of OODA stands for observe, orient, decide, and act. And the key to it is that you want to make decisions faster than your enemy, so that as you make a decision, they have to react to it. And while they're trying to figure out what they're going to do to react to it, you're already moving to the next decision. So you're already 2 or 3 decisions ahead of what they're working on. So you're inside their decision-making cycle, which then, again, they're making decisions that don't even matter anymore at that point. And so he implemented this OODA loop cycle, decision-making cycle with the pilots. And it works on the ground as well. It works anywhere. It works in the business world. It works in politics. It works wherever you want to make it work, because it's all about making decisions faster. And that puts your enemy at a disadvantage because you're inside their decision-making cycle.
Yeah, this is a fascinating diagram. Just looking at this and reading about it from the articles you had sent. But yeah, if you could, you mentioned to me previously about Donald Trump and him using the OODA loop cycle.
I think he's a genius at it. I think he has perfected it. He makes decisions like here recently. He'll do something, make a decision and do something, which makes the enemy, the other side, react. And while they're trying to figure out how to react, he's already moved on to the next decision thing. And so he's already 2 or 3 decisions ahead of what they're reacting to, which just keeps them on the defense. And by the time they make a decision, it really doesn't matter at that point. So I think he has perfected, whether or not he knows that it's an OODA loop cycle that he's perfected or not. I think he has perfected it, and he's a master at it.
Yeah, it's interesting the lexicon that's used here, because I know Chris and Burning Bright have talked a lot about the feedback loops that he uses, where he's like almost gauging public opinion when he puts out rhetoric or puts out narratives, and then he makes a small adjustment to what he's saying or makes a small adjustment to what the policy position is going to be. And I'm looking at this diagram right now, and it certainly, I see that process in this diagram, which is obviously a lot more complicated than the way that Burning Bright and Chris have described it. But it's a really, really interesting decision-making chart.
Well, I think you can take it one step further with President Trump. I think that he throws out things for that narrative to get feedback, to figure out where his issues are with the American people. But I think he's already figured out 2 or 3 or 4 scenarios, and he already has a plan. If it's this, then we'll do that. If it's that, then we'll do this. And so that just increases his decision-making process even faster, because he's already figured out what he wants to do based on what could happen. And I think you see that in his decision-making process, that he already knows. He knows what his intent is. He knows what he wants it to look like at the end. And then he's just trying to figure out the best ways to get there. He knows the strategy. Now he's just trying to do the tactics in the simplest way, the least painful way possible.
Yeah. One thing that I've been reporting on, I guess you'd say, or just analyzing, discussing, are these reports of like the quote unquote conflicts happening within the cabinet, where you have two different sides that are arguing opposite positions, and Trump, it's up to Trump to make the decision. He's the executive, but of course that's being painted as some sort of a negative element or negative aspect of the administration, and somehow that is undermining President Trump's decision making or his ability to operate. And I just wonder, how often does that happen in the military, where you bring in two guys who maybe don't agree on something and have them hash it out in front of you so you can witness the dialogue in real time?
Oh, I can tell you my decision-making process has always been, and some people in the military use it, some don't. Some are very authoritarian, micromanaging, do it exactly as I tell you how to do it. And those people are horrible. I hated working for people like that. And I have. But then I've also worked for guys that taught me this is the way to do it. And look, discussion is a good thing. You want discussion. You want people to throw out ideas, because if you don't, you're only using your knowledge, your skills, your abilities to make decisions. If you use everybody else's, that's where you get creativity. Because I don't care how long you've been a leader, you don't have all the answers. And if you think you do, good luck. So what I would do is I'd say, okay, here's the problem we have. This is the mission we have. This is what we have to get done. Give me some ideas. And I was happy to listen to everybody's and anybody's ideas and arguments back and forth and discussion about what the best thing was, until I made a decision. Once I made a decision, that was it. Now this is what we're doing. I listened to everybody. I may have used some of your ideas and some of Burning Bright's ideas and some of Chris's ideas, and thrown in some of mine, and that's the decision we're going with. But until that decision is made, I want to hear everybody's point of view, and so I don't think that's a weakness at all in the President Trump's decision-making process or in his cabinet. You want people to throw out ideas and to disagree with you if they think it's wrong. Then it's up to you to decide what's right and what's the best path forward as the leader. But until that point, you ought to be willing to listen to everybody when you have time.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. Yeah. When you have time, and I'm sure Donald Trump probably is very short on that at all times. But one thing that I've been speculating on is just the idea of friction, because that's basically what that is friction in the White House, and the friction kind of drives conflict, and then the conflict forces resolution, and the resolution then almost like that chart, it's like it forces you to make a decision. And then as I'm reading through this MCDP manual, right there in the first chapter, The Nature of War defined friction, and then scrolling down, it says war defined, and it gives the definition. It says friction, portrayed as a clash between two opposing wills. War appears a simple enterprise. In practice, the conduct of war becomes extremely difficult because of the countless factors that impinge on it. These factors collectively have been called friction, which Clausewitz describes as the force that makes the apparently easy so difficult. Friction is the force that resists all action and saps energy. It makes the simple difficult, and the difficult seemingly impossible. The very essence of war, as a clash between opposed wills, creates friction. In this dynamic environment of interacting forces, friction abounds. Friction may be mental, as in indecision over a course of action. It may be physical, as an effective enemy fire or a terrain obstacle that must be overcome. Friction may be external, imposed by enemy action, but terrain, weather, or mere chance. Friction may be self-induced, caused by such factors as lack of a clearly defined goal, a lack of coordination, unclear or complicated plans, complex tasks, organizations or command relationships, or complicated technologies. Whatever form it takes, because war is a human enterprise, friction will always have a psychological as well as a physical impact. While we should attempt to minimize self-induced friction, the greater requirement is to fight effectively despite the existence of friction. One essential means to overcome friction is the will. We prevail over friction through persistent strength of mind and spirit. While striving ourselves to overcome the effects of friction, we must attempt at the same time to raise our enemy's friction to a level that weakens his ability to fight. We can readily identify countless examples of friction, but until we have experienced it ourselves, we cannot hope to appreciate it fully. Only through experience can we come to appreciate the force of will necessary to overcome friction and to develop a realistic appreciation for what is possible in war and what is not. While training should attempt to approximate the conditions of war, we must realize it can never fully duplicate the level of friction of real combat. And yeah, I mean, the first time I read through that, it just, epiphany might be an overstatement, but it really made me think about the idea of when it says we should like you have to have strength of spirit and mind in order to overcome friction. I feel like people who shy away from discourse and shy away from debate lack that strength of spirit and mind, and without that, you can't pursue really any kind of conflict, like warfare, so to speak, because you can't overcome the friction that even within the room, within your like among your friends and allies. How are you going to deal with the friction being dealt to you by the enemy, right?
Right. I mean, and that's a perfect definition of friction. And I think one of the ways you overcome that is decentralized decision making, so that at the lowest level, the simplest level, they're making decisions. And like it said, you can train, and I told you we train unlike any other army, but it is still training. But the more you train, your body, your mind, your body is a creature of habit. So the way you train is what you're going to do. So when all that friction starts to happen, and you're going to do what you trained. And if you trained well, then you'll make some good decisions and you'll do some things well. If you didn't train well, then you're going to make bad decisions. And I think that is one of the things that the realistic training that we do helps during those times of friction, because friction is that's everyday thing with everybody. I don't care what you're doing. You run into those issues, internal and external, that are going to try to slow you down, prevent you from accomplishing what you want to accomplish. That's just something we have to learn how to deal with in life, not just in the military. Just the consequences in the military might be a little different than they are, on your day-to-day basis for a civilian, because you're talking about life and death of not only yourself but your soldiers. But friction is a normal thing in human life.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I would agree. Yeah. So one of the other things that I wrote down when you and I talked on Friday was when we mentioned or discussed Helmuth von Moltke, because I mentioned some of these guys that I had been reading into over the past year who kind of helped create the doctrine of maneuver warfare. And von Moltke, as I understand it, was the Prussian general who, or field marshal who, really used railroads in the 1800s to move troops around and to outflank his enemy. And then you had responded to that comment by saying when he was vastly outnumbered, like he was very much outnumbered and he was able to outflank his enemy. I was wondering if you had any more insight you could offer to that, because it just made me think of some things that I wanted to touch on.
Yeah. So I think that, again, I think you got to think back to really what was the part that started all of this was the Peace of Westphalia, in 1648, because that's what gave us nation states like we have today. That the international model of nation states was really developed. The key principles were developed during that peace. And the Prussians, the Germans, they were kind of at a disadvantage at that point, because they weren't really a unified country at that point. So, but during the Austro-Prussian War, Moltke he mobilized much faster than the Austrians did. And the way he did it was with railroads and the planning and trying to take some of that friction out of getting soldiers from wherever they are to the front. And he did it much faster than the Austrians did. But we had this discussion also that, geography does matter, and you got to understand that geography plays a huge part in all of this, in how you determine how you're going to fight and the strategies you're going to use. And I think that's one of the reasons that it was the Germans who really came up with the maneuver warfare as a principal strategy, because they had to fight on two fronts many times. So they had to use their interior lines to move soldiers and equipment from one front to the other when things went wrong at one front or the other. And a perfect example of that was in World War I, during the Battle of Tannenberg, where the Germans were vastly outnumbered by the Russian army, but they were able to lock them in place with a feint, which made them stay where they were, and then maneuver the rest of his forces using railroads, using all of those modern techniques of transportation to be at the point where he could encircle them and defeat them.
Yeah, and so that's where I really started to see the potential of connection and relationship between the kinetic doctrine of maneuver warfare and the fifth generation psychological narrative warfare that we're all witnessing right now in real time. Because the idea that Moltke was outnumbered but was still able to outflank his enemy using speed and deception and feigns just reminds me a lot of like what Donald Trump seems to be doing at all times, especially when you consider in 2017 when he went into DC as a total outsider with seemingly ostensibly no allies and was somehow able to run circles around a lot of the experienced politicians of the day. And so I guess I was wondering if it's possible. I mean, when you're evaluating, could you provide some insight to we laymen when you're making an evaluation and this might be too difficult. It could be too specific. I'm sure it's case by case, but how do you decide as like a field commander to engage the enemy head on, like in a more traditional attrition style warfare, or to try to set up a feint and draw them into maybe an ambush or try to outflank them?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that would help is if we define what feint and demonstration is, because they're not the same. For it to be a feint, you actually have to make contact with the enemy, whether that's on the battlefield or in business or in politics. You can use that word for any of those. It's just a strategy, a tactic to gain their attention, to lock them in place, think something is happening there where it's really not going to happen there. And then demonstration is you don't make contact. You throw things out there, make them look at it, make them think that's what's coming, but it doesn't. And I'll give you two really good examples of that. A feint, in my opinion, a very good one, was the Russian moving toward Kiev. The Russians had no interest in capturing Kiev. They wanted the Donbass. But by using a feint, putting contact, making it look like they were going to Kiev, drew soldiers away from the Donbass, which then allowed them to gain what they wanted in that area. A demonstration, a very good description of demonstration or example of demonstration, is during D-Day, where we had General Patton in England, and everybody believed that he was going to lead the major invasion of Europe, and he was across from the Pas de Calais, which is the shortest distance across the English Channel. And he had his army that he was in charge of was all paper and plastic tanks and plastic planes, and there was no interest, no plan to have him cross the channel at that point. But it locked those German soldiers and resources to fight that fight, because they thought that's where it was coming. And then, of course, we landed in Normandy. Another good one was the Marines during the first Gulf War. They had all the Marines out on the ships, landing craft, sailing up and down the Kuwaiti coast. No plan to have them land in combat, do a beach landing in combat. But the Iraqis didn't know that, and they had to keep soldiers there, which then pulled them away from where we really wanted to go, which was the big left hook. So you need to understand that this demonstration and feint are not the same thing.
Interesting.
You can use them both, and you should. And I think that, that's the key. If you can grab their attention, either with a demonstration or a feint, and hold them in place, then that gives you the ability to maneuver places that they're not, or they're weak in, without having to worry about reinforcements coming from another part of the front. So I think that, and that's what we did in the first Gulf War. We locked them into Kuwait, and we locked them into the Wadi al-Batin with the 1st Cavalry Division, doing a feint into there. And then the rest of us went around the left and killed them basically from the side. We caught them without ever having to fight all of them at once. We fought them as we came upon them. And that's why it was such a massacre. That's why we were able to win in 4 days.
Yeah, the Patton one from D-Day, that's like the famous video of the guys flipping over the balloon tanks. And I think that was the 4th PSYOP group for those.
It was
keeping score at home. The same guys putting out those YouTube videos now. So interesting connection there. But that is a really interesting distinction, though, the difference between a feint and a demonstration, because I do feel like we always use the term feint whenever we're describing like deception and warfare, but there is this other concept of demonstration.
Right, and that's the key. Feint, you got to actually make contact. You got to actually draw them in to something, whereas a demonstration, you're just holding them in place. You don't really make contact, and you may not have any plan to make contact, but they don't know that. And as long as you make it realistic, then they still have to react to that. They still have to stay in place. And I think, if you're talking about politics, you have feints and you have demonstrations where, President Trump throws things out there that he has no interest in doing. But again, then you're inside their decision cycle. They got to start figuring out, well, if he does that, then this is what we got to do. And then you go do something else. And then there's other times when he actually does do something, and it may not be the main effort. It may not be what he really wants, but it's enough to draw their attention. So then he's free to make decisions to get around whatever it is that he's trying to hold their attention toward.
It's like the tariffs, like that would be a feint. Like he engaged them, he put the tariffs in place, and now all of a sudden we're getting a 90-day pause on it, and everyone's lining up to negotiate and cut a deal because they know if they don't, they 100% are getting these tariffs, and a lot of them can't afford it.
Yeah, that's a great example. I mean, that's exactly. I would say that's a good feint. Exactly. What the end goal of President Trump with the tariffs is, I don't know, but he knows, and he's using every tool he has to get to that end state. However, he needs to get there. So I think again, people who think that he is bumbling through this and he doesn't have a plan and he doesn't know what he wants, they're vastly underestimating him, I think.
Yeah, Yeah, exactly. And then like a demonstration. I'm trying to think of a good example, but there certainly must be one with all of the stuff surrounding Russia and Iran, where um, things are being said, like even out of Trump's mouth, that he couldn't possibly mean, because that would probably equal World War III. You know, talking about
Right.
striking
When he's
Iran.
talking about bombing Iran if they don't come
Yeah.
to the table, he's not going to bomb Iran
Yeah.
just because they don't come to the table. But that grabs people's attention, even if he doesn't do anything, if he doesn't engage it at all. It's out there, and now they got to think about that. And again, it's all about getting inside that decision-making cycle, where you can make decisions faster than the people you're trying to defeat, whether that's enemy on the battlefield or enemy in the politics or enemy in the business world. You know, your competition. You're trying to get inside that decision-making cycle so that your decisions are 2 or 3 decisions ahead of what they're trying to decide.
Yeah, and I mean, so he was in Italy this past weekend and met with Zelensky. But zooming out a little bit, it's interesting watching him operate among the Europeans, because I guess it's probably a combination of feints and demonstrations, where he's forcing them all to argue with one another by leveraging his relationships with people like Giorgia Meloni in Italy, where she's saying, I'm not going to participate in this continental army that y'all want to form. If y'all want to send your troops over to Ukraine, you do it, but Italy is not going to be a part of it.
Yeah.
And now
and Hungary is the same thing.
Yeah, and so now all of a sudden the European Union is not as unified as they thought, and discussions are happening, and it's all going to come down to dollars and cents, and of course they don't have the money for it, so it's forcing them.
Nor do they have the ability. Nor do they have the ability to NATO without America, America planning, America resources, American money, American military expertise. NATO won't stand very long unless they start ponying up and start doing the things that they should have been doing for the last 50 years. Then they could, but it's going to be painful for them, because we've run everything in NATO for so many years, you know. And President Trump's talking about giving up Supreme Allied Commander, that position in NATO. And my opinion, again, take it for what it's worth, but my opinion is that's just the first step of getting the U.S. out of NATO. You know, we got his view would my view, if I was President Trump, is I can't just pull out altogether immediately, because it'll collapse if you want NATO to survive. So let's take a step back, let them step up, learn the things they need to know, run the organization with us there to kind of guide them and help them. And then as they become better and better, then we're free to do whatever we want to do. If we want to leave, we can leave. If we want to stay, we can stay. But you know, that just, to me, that just makes sense. Giving up the Supreme Allied Command is the first step of us maybe leaving NATO, but you got to do it in increments, not just pull out all at once.
Yeah, that certainly makes sense. Certainly makes sense. And I know you served in Serbia or Kosovo, rather.
Kosovo, yeah.
Yeah, Kosovo, which I believe was part of Yugoslavia, if I'm not mistaken.
It was. It was part of the former Yugoslavia that fell apart after Tito died. You know, first it was the Bosnia-Herzegovina battle in the 1997-98, and then it was Kosovo. And, you know, it borders Serbia. Kosovo does. In fact, that was part of our sector, was we had a border with Serbia. So yeah, I get a lot of interesting things happened in Kosovo over that 9 months that I was there.
Yeah, we actually covered that for a couple, I think like 2 weeks on Breaking History, where we had some Serbian guys on to talk about it. And but prior to that, I didn't have a deep knowledge of it. The extent of my knowledge of it was in middle school and early high school, I played soccer with a bunch of Bosnian guys who had relocated to the United States as a result of the war. And so like I had firsthand experience with people who were directly affected, some of them pretty dramatically. Like one guy I remember said he like was living in bombed out buildings for a year with his dad before they made it to the United States. But yeah, I mean, that was a pretty wild sequence, but I actually didn't understand like the whole geography of it until I really went and started looking at maps of it. And for those who aren't aware, I mean, we're looking at, here's Italy right here, the Adriatic Sea. This is a beautiful part of the world. I mean, it's not sometimes when you think of like Kosovo and Serbia, you hear those names and you can't really appreciate where in the world it is. But this is Slovenia up here. That was part of Yugoslavia. That's where Melania Trump's from. So it's like Italy basically, just across the ocean. But from a visual standpoint, it looks very similar to Italy, and it's a beautiful part of the world.
Well, the coastline, lots of beautiful port cities and resorts along the coastline. As you get further inland, some of those places aren't so pretty.
Yeah, I'm sure in Serbia, Serbia is probably not as pretty as the coastline of Croatia, I'd imagine.
Yeah, Kosovo didn't have a whole lot of pretty places inside, but yeah, I mean, again, you know, geography matters, and that part of Europe has historically been a pathway from Italy, from Europe into the Middle East, Turkey, and you know the straits there, and where Greece and Turkey basically meet. And a lot of invasions have gone through there. That place has changed hands many times between Christian and Muslim, and there's still that intermix there between all those cultures and all those religions. And you know, Tito was able to hold them together. I'm not a fan of Tito. I'm not praising him, but he used brutal methods sometimes, but he kept everybody together. And then once he died, it just fell apart. I mean, it just literally all the different factions, all the different the different cultures, the different religions, everybody just started fighting each other, and it fell apart fairly quickly and very brutal too. You know, I was in Stuttgart, Germany for 6 months in support of operations in Bosnia, and some of the stories that came out of Bosnia were pretty brutal.
Yeah, and I recall you telling a story. It might have been a Deadwood. I think it was Deadwood. Well, telling me about your experience in Kosovo and how you had different ethnicities. I think you said you had some Serbians and some what was it?
Albanians and Gypsies.
Albanians and Gypsies. And your job, if you would, could you tell us that story?
Yeah. So when I first got there, I mean, none of them worked together at all. They had, after the fighting had happened and we got there, and we were the second rotation in. The first rotation there was for 6 months, and then we came in. They were supposed to be there for 9 months, but the conditions were so bad they pulled them out after 6 months and then brought us in, and we were there for 9 months. And they wouldn't talk. Nobody was talking to each other. They didn't. There was no business whatsoever that had mixed Serbs and Albanians working in it. And so I looked at it as part of my job was to kind of, if we're going to really here for peacekeeping, then we got to get them to the point where they are actually peaceful to each other. And the only way to do that, in my opinion, was the economic piece of it. You had to make it viable, a reason to hire Serbs, a reason to hire Albanians, because it was economically beneficial to you. So I went through, and I started when every day I was outside the wire. Every day I left the base and I was out talking to people, building that relationship with the leaders, the Albanians, the Serbs, the Gypsies. And when I first started, I had meetings with only Serbs in them. or only Albanians, or with only the Gypsies. And for about the first month, every meeting started with a history lesson. They'd tell me every bad thing that the Serbs would tell me every bad thing that the Albanians have done to them for the last 1,000 years. And I'd go from there to the Serb meeting, and the Serbs would tell me everything that the Albanians had done to, and I'm a history major. I know there all kinds of bad things went on there, both sides. So eventually, after about a month, I said, okay, stop. No more history lessons. I don't care what happened 1,000 years ago. What I care about is right now, going forward, what's going to happen here. And so I started building that relationship and figuring out the things that they were really concerned about. And again, and I've said this many times, and I believe it, most people care. I don't care who you are, what side of that you're on. There are certain things that everybody cares about. I got to feed my family. My family's got to be safe. I got to have a house, a roof over their head. Those are common things that every human father, husband wants for his family. So you start with what you have in common. Because if you start out here with what's different, you're never going to get to what's in common, because you're just going to argue all the time. So you start with what's in common, and then you work your way out. And so that was the philosophy I took. And I said, okay, to the Serbs, I said, what do you need to survive right now? And they said, we need jobs, we need gas, we need access to supermarkets, to stores. They didn't have any supermarkets, to stores. And so I said, okay. And I went to the Albanians, asked them the same thing. And they had, because they had some of the gas stations, Serb had some of the gas stations, but in those areas where they couldn't travel a long distance, they had to have access to whoever had the gas station. So then I just started going to each one of those businesses, and I said, look, we can help you. We can help you make more money, to be more successful. I said, and we're more than willing to do that. And the key one to me was the mine. There was a quarry that was in our sector. And before all the fighting, it belonged to the Serb. After all the fighting, it belonged to the Albanians. So not only did they probably not have the knowledge to run the quarry, but they also didn't have explosives, and we didn't allow them to have explosives, nor was I going to allow them to have explosives. So I said to the guy, I said, look, you need explosives to run this quarry. I said, I can provide those for you. I'm not giving them to you. I'll bring somebody from the outside in, they'll blow up whatever part of this rock you want blown up, and then you can do whatever you need to do with it. And every time you need that, we'll bring the explosive guy in, and he'll do that for you. And they said, that would be great. That'd be fantastic. I said, one thing you got to do for me. I said, you got to hire 5 Serbs. And he said, can't do it. Absolutely not. I said, okay, then you can't have explosives. And I walked out. And the next week I came in and said, you want explosives? Oh, yeah. Hire 5 Serbs. I think it took me about a month to get him to do it. And he finally did it. And I sat through the hiring process. I sat in there. So I knew that it was going to be fair and people weren't going to be taken advantage of or abused. I sat through the hiring process. He picked 5 guys. At any time that those Serbs were at the quarry, I had soldiers there making sure that they were safe until the minute they left. By the time I left, my soldiers weren't there. They were eating lunch together. They were talking together. They were working together, because they realized that they needed each other to make this thing work. And I did the same thing in a meat packing plant. That was the exact opposite. Before the fighting, it belonged to the Albanians. Afterwards, it belonged to the Serbs. I did it at gas stations. So, start with what you have in common and work your way out, and you can solve a lot of these problems.
I love that you used a feint on the guy. Like you engaged them and you walked away. And then eventually he was like, I need those explosives. So I guess I'm hiring these Serbs.
Yeah. He gave in. And the meat packing plant was the same thing. They needed a generator. It had been destroyed during the fighting. So the meat packing plant was worthless. It had no cooling. And believe me, when we went in there to clean it out, that was one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen in my entire life. 3 months worth of meat just hanging and rotten. It was disgusting. But he needed a generator, and I said, well, I can talk to the NGOs and I can get you a generator. And he said, great. I said, but you got to hire 5 Albanians. And I went through the same process with him. And by the time I left, I think that eventually the quarry had like 20 or 25 Serbs working at it. And the meatpacking plant had same thing, had like 15, 20 Albanians working at that. And then you throw the gypsies in, which both sides hated the gypsies. So to get them involved was even harder. But again, build trust with them, start with what they have in common, and work your way out. And generally that will work.
Yeah, manual labor is a great way to get guys to get along, because just personal experience, that's always a good way to build camaraderie. Yeah, and it's interesting. It makes me think of these businessmen that Donald Trump has deployed. Steve Wickoff, Adam Bowler, most recently Mossad Bolis, who is Tiffany Trump's recent father-in-law. And he's been appointed the ambassador to the Democratic Republic of Congo. And Marco Rubio just held a press conference on Friday where he was able to resolve or sign like a memorandum of understanding between the DRC and Rwanda over all of these terrorist attacks that are happening on their in their mines, in their mining cities in eastern DRC. Tens of trillions of dollars worth of rare earth minerals there. And the majority of all of the rare earths that are put into the marketplace and bought up by Apple and Raytheon and all these companies that make all the electronics, not only electronics, but the missiles and defense contractors, all of that stuff. They're buying materials out of the DRC. And so it's a big deal.
Yeah. Well, I think again, we can get there. The economic piece is a huge piece of it. If you can show people that it makes sense that they're going to be better off. And part of it is what we're seeing right now in Africa, throwing off all the colonial rulers, and especially in that big swath of land in the north central part of Africa, where all of those are now independent and free of colonial rule. That's the first step. Once you can get their hand out of it, so that they're actually benefiting from the resources that they have, then you can start showing them the benefits of working together with each other, so that everybody wins, not just one side or the other, or the colonial rulers. So I think Africa in your lifetime is going to be a huge player in the market. And China's betting on that. I mean, why do you think China is investing so much money in Africa? Because they see them as our replacement. Instead of sending everything to us, they see Africa being the next market where they're going to flood it with all their cheap goods. And once they get to that point and they don't need us anymore, and they will get there, then they can deal with us however they want. And I think, however you feel about the Chinese, and I think President Trump does a pretty good job of dealing with the Chinese as a friend and as a foe, because they are both, I think, depending on what it is you're talking about. That's international politics. If it, just like Trump is an America first, China has to be a China first. Russia needs to be Russia first. And I think that's part of his goal with these tariffs and with all that kind of stuff, is to get these countries to be more sovereign, to be more independent on themselves, to build their infrastructure, to build their factories, to help the people in their own country, not just export it all. So I think you're seeing a lot of that. But I think Africa has that capability. They've got some huge things that they got to overcome. the lies of the map maker, all those boundaries that the Europeans drew that make no sense whatsoever. We're going to have to figure out a way to fix that. And historically, the only way to fix that is with a whole lot of blood. So hopefully we can figure that one out without going that route. And then, they need a common language. I think the last time I heard it was like 2,000 or 2,500 different languages in Africa. It's hard to run to be unified if you can't even speak each other's language. So they need a common language, whatever that is. They pick whichever one they want. I don't think really matters, but you need to have that common language to allow them to come together and be the force that they could become. And they will, I think it's going to happen.
I thought of you because I know you and I have talked about that before, about changing the lines on the map and what that requires. I thought of you when I saw this when I was writing up this take of the news brief where Sergei Lavrov was talking about the arbitrary borders that are drawn all over Africa and how that's fueling the instability and like what it's going to, and how do we change these borders to make it more agreeable and applicable to the people living there. You make a really, really good point about China and about their incentive structure there. Because if you think about it, if they want to flood the Africa with all their cheap goods and sell them stuff, they can't have the African people be a bunch of poor slaves. They need them to have some kind of an economy. Like they need them to have some form of prosperity, so they have the money to buy their stuff. So that gives them the incentive to go in there and actually build them up a little bit, rather than just totally exploiting them the way that they have been from some of these European powers for a while. And then finally,
I think both the Chinese and the Russians are doing some good things in Africa. And I think that the African people are going to benefit from it. And hopefully at some point we jump in there and are helping instead of hindering. And it sounds like we're trying to, this deal between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo is a good start.
Yeah, it seems like the game changer really with these businessmen that Trump is deploying, who really are making the State Department look bad, because none of these diplomats of the State Department can do what these businessmen are seemingly able to do. And according to them, all it requires is just going and meeting face to face with these people and talking to them, which is considered verboten and totally unthinkable in the eyes of these like career politicians. They're saying, how could you possibly go sit down face to face with Vladimir Putin and look him in the eye and give him that kind of legitimacy? And the businessmen are like, how else are you going to cut a deal with him if you aren't looking at him in the eye?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I say this about leadership all the time, but it's true about everything in life, in my opinion. It's about people and trust. If people trust you, then you can start somewhere. If somebody doesn't trust you, I don't care what you have that's available. They don't want it. And I think that's part of the problem that we're running into in Africa, whereas the Russians and the Chinese are new to the continent, and they're going in there with the thought of helping the African people. Whereas for many years, for forever, the Europeans have been the colonial rulers and have cared nothing about the African people. And I would argue that probably the same, not to the same degree, but the American government hasn't cared about Africa and hasn't done much to help them, and probably done some things that tore away some of that trust. Libya and some things that we've done in the Middle East has hurt us in the trust area, and it's going to take a while to rebuild that.
For sure. Well, here, let's do this. If you're okay with it, let's do our last ad, and then I'd like to talk about the revolutions of warfare. Because that article you sent me was fascinating. You and I had talked offline about the developments the Russians are making from their experience in Ukraine, and how they're learning, like, from this drone warfare, like the hybrid combined arms warfare that's happening there with the drones and the infantry and the tanks. So if you're okay with that, let's hit this last ad.
Let's do that.
All right. Let's see. We got My Pillow.
You're still looking good.
I'm still feeling good. You know, I've got all your MyPillow products. Mattress topper, bed sheets, MyPillows, towels, slippers, blankets.
I'm interrupting this commercial to do something I've never done before. Get 2 MyPillows absolutely free on orders of $100 or more. I can't do this forever, so get on board with this great sale today. Our best-selling 6-piece bath towel sets or kitchen towel sets, just $29.98. Our famous standard MyPillows only $14.98. Queens $18.98. King size only $1 more. Body pillows $29.98. Multi-use MyPillow 2.0s with pillowcase $9.98. Save $40 on our Spring Percale and Giza Dream bed sheet sets. Any size, any color. So go to MyPillow.com or call that number on your screen. Use your promo code to save up to 80% on all MyPillow products. And when you spend $100 or more, get 2 standard MyPillows.
All right. So yeah, these writing for the news brief gives me an advantage because I'm tracking a lot of these storylines. Then some of them just kind of stick out in my head, and I file them away. One of them really has been this narrative about the Abrams tank and how it's been used in Ukraine or misused in Ukraine. And you and I were talking about this a little bit, but the bullet points are that we've sent, looks like 31 Abrams tanks. And this is from the 3rd of March. This story is almost 2 months old, but it says, as of the 3rd of March, they have lost 19 of the 31 tanks that we've sent. And I'd like you to comment here in a minute about what that means to lose 19 Abrams tanks in in less than a year. But also I just wanted to kind of jump around some of these headlines. So here's an example of the hybrid warfare that I'm talking about, where you have a Swedish tank being hit by a drone. There's a drone video, and so the Russians are filming this, and then they're putting it out there, I guess, as part of their psychological warfare operation. Here's Kiev admitting that they're taking huge losses in Kursk. Here's the U.S. in December admitting that the tanks that were very much hyped up by mostly the Democrats, but just the establishment uniparty last year, have been kind of a failure. The more I dug into it, it sounds like we sent them kind of their are very, very obsolete M1 tanks, the ones that like we wouldn't even deploy at this point because they're several generations old. But what I found interesting in some of these articles that I've been writing about is that these guys, these tankers, the Ukrainian tankers, despite all the training they've been given in this very short amount of time by NATO and the US and Britain and whoever else, they're totally misusing these tanks. Apparently, the reports are is that they're using them as pillboxes. They're keeping them stationary. They're using them as like bunkers and pillboxes. They're not driving them around and actually utilizing maneuver warfare or combined arms offensive operations. So, if you could just talk, please give us some insight into what it means to lose 19 tanks in less than a year and why you would use a M1 tank as a pillbox.
Yeah, so I don't even think we've lost 19 tanks in the history of the M1 tank going back to the first Gulf War. We lost none in the first Gulf War, and we lost some in Iraq during the 14, 15 years we were there. So to lose 19 in less than a year, you obviously aren't doing something right. And I think, it goes back to what makes our equipment so effective is that it fights in that combined arms arena. Again, let's talk about what combined arms is, because a lot of terms out there. Combined arms just means more than two or more services or two or more branches in the same service. So in the Army, that would be you're using tanks, you're using infantry, you're using artillery, attack helicopters, and they're a combined arms team. So they've trained together, they know each other, what the tactics are, they know the things they have to do to supplement each of the strengths of those branches in the Army. And then you can talk about, the other things that I always hear people joint. Joint means that it's two or more services. So you're talking about the Army and the Air Force working together, or the Army and the Marines, or the Navy and the Marines, whatever those two services are. And that's the great thing about the way we fight, is that we do use a combined arms strategy. We do fight in a combined, in a joint service. Army never goes anywhere by itself. The Air Force doesn't go by itself. I mean, when we go to war, it's all of the services working together. And then you throw in combined, which means that now you're throwing in troops from other countries, 2 or more countries, which the first Gulf War, I think there was 39 countries that were involved in the coalition. And that comes with some pluses and some minuses. But you work through it. And then we also, in the American Army, now you throw in interagency. So we're using people. When I was in Kosovo, I had people from DEA, I had people from ATF, I had people from DIA, Department of Intelligence. I probably had CIA people there too. I don't know. But using all the strengths, that old adage that the sum is more than the parts. All the strengths that an M1 tank has goes away if it doesn't have air cover, if it doesn't have artillery support, if it doesn't have infantry support. And that's what I'm seeing in Ukraine, is that the Ukrainians, they have all this great equipment. And even if it's a 2 or 3 generations back, M1, it's still good equipment. That's what we fought the first Gulf War in. So, I mean, it's still good equipment. But they don't know how to do combined arms well enough, so that the strength of that tank is degraded, because it doesn't have all the other pieces that help make it what it is. And then I think that they don't know how to maintain it, or they don't have the capability to maintain it, which is huge for an M1 tank. That's one of the complaints that has always been about the M1 tank, the maintenance and the fuel that it uses with that turbo engine.
Mm-hmm.
And then you throw into it that I got to question the training that they've probably had on it. And do they really know how to use it to its full capacity? Maybe they do, maybe they don't. I've not been involved in that, but that would be an argument. If they're losing 19 in less than a year, my guess is they don't know how to use it to its full capacity.
Yeah, and like that drone video that I showed is not unique at all. There's so many of those out there, and the targets aren't just tanks. I mean, the targets are guys getting in a pickup truck, like soldiers getting in a pickup truck, like whatever. A soldier's gathering
in a foxhole.
Yeah, in a foxhole, like whatever. And you have to wonder, because I can go up to the hobby store up the street and buy a little drone. So you gotta wonder, like, what's the cost of making these drones versus like the cost of training one of these soldiers, and
the cost of the equipment. I mean, M1 tanks are going to cost you $5-6 million. One of those drones costs you at most a couple $1,000 maybe. If you're talking about military grade, but and I think that's part of the problem that they're running into, that they're working through. And we had that discussion. The advantage you have by being in a war like this, the Russians do, and the Ukrainians, but certainly the Russians, because the Ukrainians are never going to be a threat to us. The Russians could be at some point. And I think, again, you can't underestimate the Russians, and I think a lot of people do, is that they are gaining real life experience going through that friction of war. All those things that can go wrong, that do go wrong, that just make it much more difficult. And I think the Ukrainians are not handling it as well. So they've turned the tanks into pillboxes. They don't want them to move, because once you move, then you become a target. I think the Russians have come up with some very, and we are too, in the new tanks and vehicles that we are producing now. At least I'm being told that they're going to have some ways to counter drone strikes and those kinds of things. But the tanks that we have given them don't have that. So instead of coming up with ways to do that, they just park them and use them as pillboxes. But that kind of leads you to that revolution in military affairs discussion that we had. I don't know how much time we have, Ghost.
We can keep going. I mean, normally I keep it 2 hours or less. So I think if we go another 25 minutes, we're good.
Okay. So revolutionary military affairs is an interesting thing. It's, that is, as technology, as strategies make, mainly technology, as technology changes the way you fight on the battlefield. It's not just an incremental increase in technology, from a World War II tank to the M1 tank. That's incremental technology, really, if you're talking about a battlefield. When something drastically changes the way you fight, that's a revolution in military affairs. And there's been a few of those throughout history. The three big ones, we want to go way back in history. The three big ones, World War I, where you had the introduction of aviation, you had the introduction of chemical weapons, the beginning of armor, machine guns. That changed the whole face of battle, where cavalry went away. Couldn't use cavalry anymore because of the barbed wire, because of the machine guns.
The Battle of the Somme.
The Battle of the Somme lost 60,000 soldiers in a day.
Yeah,
the British did. I mean,
they
lost a whole generation.
They just walked guys into like overlapping machine gun fire.
Yeah. So that changed, and then you saw trench warfare, which was the answer, kind of like what the Ukrainians are doing with the tanks. Just put them in place. Don't move them. Don't go on the offensive with them. So that was the first one. Then World War II, where you got blitzkrieg, completely changed. Maneuver warfare changed the face of battle forever. And then you had the strategic bombers. You had aircraft carriers, which changed Navy forever. Although I think they're about to wake up here that maybe that's going to change again here soon. Then you had the Cold War. You had ballistic missiles, nuclear weapons. Those were the three big ones. And I think the ones you're seeing right now, the current ones that we're seeing, is the information technology, the satellites. You take the satellites away from our military, we are in big trouble, because just about everything we do is based on that technology. Our guidance systems on our vehicles, our guidance systems on our weapons, our communication is all done through that. Then you got precision strike capabilities that have changed the battlefield. I was telling you earlier, we have gotten so good at the precision strike piece that if a submarine 500 miles off the coast here in Florida fired a cruise missile at my condo that I live in, not only can they guarantee it will hit my condo, they can tell you which window in this condo it's going to go through. That's the precision that we're talking about with some of these weapons, that they don't miss. And not only don't they miss, they hit exactly what it is you wanted them to hit. And then you got stealth technology that we're seeing now, that's been around for a little while, but you're seeing it even more, not only in airplanes, but now you're seeing it in drones. You're seeing it in UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, the drone piece of it. And they're even trying to work out stealth technology for ships and tanks and those kinds of things. And I think we may eventually get that point. And then the ones that are on the horizon, the revolution in military affairs that I foresee on the horizon is autonomous systems. So no humans involved, drones, robots, those kinds of things on the battlefield. And I think that's coming, whether we like it or not. I think it's going to come. Cyber warfare has just begun, and it's going to change the way we do a lot of things in the military. It's going to change the landscape of the battlefield. And then the last one that General Klaus probably knows much more about than I do is the space warfare piece of it. That, how do you deny satellites to the enemy? How do you deny just putting weapons in space? Just imagine how much shorter it would be for a missile fired from space to hit an enemy than if we got a fire from the United States and it goes all the way across one of the oceans into that country. The the space piece, we haven't even begun yet, and we'll see where that goes. But those revolutions in military affairs have drastically changed how the battlefield looks, and we're in the middle of one of those. And I used to give this talk a few years ago. I talked about revolutions in military affairs, and most of these things just happened because the technology came up and somebody developed it, and they just figured out that it was a good use for the military. I think now you've got countries, the US, China, Russia, maybe a couple other ones out there, who aren't looking at it as by chance. They are trying to create an RMA. They're trying to look at that technology that they can use that's going to change the battlefield in a way that going to change the way we do things. And I think that's the question. Can you generate an RMA on purpose? And I think we can with the technology and the abilities that we have today. I think it is possible, and I think we're moving that way.
If G Money were here right now, this is where he probably would start talking about Bitcoin, but I won't do that.
I'm sure.
The old one not the old one, but at this point it feels old, that people have been talking about for like 6 or 7 or 8 years is the rods from God. Like the theory or the idea that there potentially are satellites that have titanium or whatever it is, poles that they would launch from space that would reach hypersonic speed and then strike the Earth with such kinetic force that it doesn't even need a warhead.
Right.
Like those are interesting concepts, very, very interesting concepts.
And I think it's very possible. If it isn't already in the works, I do think that at least the 3 big countries are looking at that possibility and trying to figure out what that looks like. You have to, if you think it's possible, then you have to figure out not only how you can do it, but how you can counter what the other countries are doing. So I think it is, you are going to see things like that.
Well, you mentioned the Navy waking up to the reality of the post-aircraft carrier era, and we might be reaching that with hypersonic missiles, because if a hypersonic missile can penetrate the defense array of an aircraft carrier, then aircraft carriers are kind of sitting ducks. But even the Houthis are kind of demonstrating the economics of these drones that they're sending out to attack these ships, because the drones they send to attack the ships are a fraction of the cost of the missiles that are being sent to intercept the drones and to strike the guys sending the drones. And while they might be able to wipe out the Houthis, it's still a proof of concept that is going to be applied in the future by others. And
right.
It's going to make technologies obsolete.
Absolutely. And you only have so many missiles on a ship. Sorry. And when you're out, you're out. And if they've got more drones than you have missiles, then eventually they're going to be successful. And, if the Houthis were as successful as it appears they were, although they didn't, I don't think they hit a ship. They may have done some damage to 1 or 2 of them, but they didn't sink any. If they can have even that minor amount of success, imagine what a near peer competitor on the battlefield, somebody who has the capability to mass produce drones, to mass produce the things that they're going to fire at these ships. It's going to be devastating. It really is. And I had this conversation with a retired Navy colonel, a captain in the Navy. He was talking about how we defend Taiwan. And I said, we can't defend Taiwan. I said, we can make it very painful for the Chinese to take Taiwan if we want. But if the Chinese want Taiwan, they're going to take Taiwan. And he said, well, they only have 2 or 3 aircraft carriers. We have 12. I said, and every one of them will be at the bottom of the South China Sea. I said, they don't need aircraft carriers when we're talking about Taiwan. They got the biggest aircraft carrier they need. Mainland China. They can launch anything they want from there. They don't have to have an aircraft. We have to, because we don't have that land mass anywhere near. So, you got to be realistic here. And I think for too long we've been unrealistic because we haven't faced that kind of a battle in a long time, a near peer competitor, really since World War II. Some would argue maybe a little bit in Korea, but certainly in Vietnam, in Iraq, Afghanistan, those weren't near peer competitors. Now, it doesn't mean that the battles weren't vicious and they were bloody, and it just means that they weren't near peer competitors. They didn't have aircraft bombing us from above. They didn't have attack helicopters. They did, so throw all that into the mix. And now you see what Russia is learning. And they're learning how to fight in this new environment.
Well, to use one of the concepts that you brought up earlier, a demonstration, you don't even really need to necessarily damage the aircraft carrier or the aircraft carrier fleet. All you need to do is just have them expend missiles and spend money and dedicate resources and attention to a specific area or specific theater, and suddenly it becomes a huge economic cost to wage the war. And they also have to place their carriers in a geographic location where maybe you are going to attack somewhere else. So
and it also puts them on the defensive rather than on the offensive, and that's what an aircraft carrier is designed for: is offensive operations, not defensive operations. And if they're spending their time keeping drones from hitting the ship, then they're certainly not launching aircraft off that carrier when all those missiles are being fired. And because a missile doesn't care whether you're friendly or enemy. If you're in the air and you get in the way, it doesn't care. There are all kinds of implications to that.
That's a really, really interesting point. Yeah. And so it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out, because it does appear that the negotiation, you and I have spoken many times at many GARTs, and we all definitely believe that there's a golden age, a golden era that is potentially upon us. And when you see a lot of this rhetoric about nuclear deals being negotiated, it seems to me that these deals potentially are more about nuclear energy plants and nuclear reactors than it is about enriching uranium for nuclear weapons. And that certainly seems to be the rhetoric out of Saudi Arabia right now. They're begging for a nuclear reactor. So, and Russia, of course, just signed a deal with Iran to build them their second nuclear reactor. So hopefully we'll see that happen. But that it does seem it's going to require a little bit of feint and demonstration and maneuver warfare to get the narrative there.
Yeah, well, you know, anytime you talk about doing things in the Middle East, you got to throw the Israelis into it, and they're always the wild card. Although I think, not as they realize that they probably can't do things on their own ever again. Not that they ever did. I mean, even in the 67, the 73 war, they got huge reinforcements of equipment and ammunition from America. So that they realize that they can't cut the Americans out of this, because they won't survive if they do. And I talked to a guy on Zoom about once every couple months, a young man that is Israeli, lives in Israel, and he's talking about all the problems that this long deployment, because this is the longest war the Israelis have ever been in, the one that they're in right now. If you count Gaza and you count Lebanon, those deployments has gone way past whatever they've ever done in the past. They've always been very quick lightning wars. They bought into the maneuver warfare completely and the blitzkrieg. But this isn't that type of fight, and it is affecting their economy very badly. He said a lot of those people that have been called up and have been gone for 3, 4, 6 months, they're the business owner. They and that business is closed, and it has been. And so he said there's all kinds of problems going on right now, and that would only get worse if you take America out of the equation for the Israelis.
Yes, the past 2 years probably I would imagine have been a wake up call for them and what they actually are capable of doing. Because you're right, they historically have always been a maneuver warfare military, and now they're forced into this war of attrition, which they are not at all set up to fight. It seems like.
No,
so
they're not.
Yeah, and so I think that's going to maybe demonstrate to them that they can't go at it alone, and I don't think Donald Trump is going to sign on for a regional war in the Middle East based on his lifetime rhetoric on wars in the Middle East. So,
yeah, I don't think President Trump wants war anywhere. I think not only with us in it, he doesn't want other. Like, he always says there are thousands of Russians and Ukrainian young men dying, and we need to put a stop to it. It doesn't matter if they're not American. War is a senseless thing. It really is. And like General Quast said, the whole objective of a strategy is to keep you from fighting a war. If you have to fight the war, then your strategy failed. So I think that's President Trump's goal, is that we don't have these wars anymore. And, and it goes back to, I was always taught as a young lieutenant, the acronym DIME. DIME, the national strategy needs to take into account all four of those things. D is diplomatic, so that's your first thing that you want to use. Try to talk some sense into people. Then you got informational, and that's propaganda, the cyber warfare, not cyber warfare, psyops, all those kinds of things. Then you got military, which is always should be your last option. And then you got economic. You want to use those other three way before you come to the military piece, unless it's forced upon you. I got that. But if it's not forced upon you, that should always be your last option.
I completely agree. Completely agree with everything you said about all of that. Specifically, certainly the part about Trump wanting peace. And I think the real signal there is, Steve Wickoff explained to Tucker that nobody in the Middle East can get their construction loans insured, and so nobody's lending money to build anything there while you have this destabilized situation, which I imagine probably goes back way further than just October 7th. Which means you have to pay cash to build buildings, and that's very, very costly, and that ties up your capital, so you can't do a lot of development on a mass scale. And then you think about the fact that Donald Trump has announced 2 buildings in the past year. He's building 2 different Trump Towers on the Arabian Peninsula in the past year. I can't imagine Donald Trump's paying all cash to build those buildings. I imagine he's gonna, based on everything he's written in all of his books, he is 100% going to leverage those and take a loan out. And so he is going to need peace in order to make that happen at the very least.
Yeah. And it's not even buildings. That's the simple thing. I mean, you start talking about, there's huge talk about finally building a railroad that connects most of the Middle East, interstate, what we call interstate, connecting them by road in a way that facilitates commerce, trade, movement of people and goods, shipping lanes. The Red Sea is basically shut down until you deal with all that kind of stuff. Or if it isn't shut down, it's very dangerous. And again, you're talking about insurance on a ship going through the Red Sea, going to triple probably the cost that it normally would have cost to go through. So all those things, stability is the key. You got to have a stable world out there if you want to take advantage of all these great things that the golden age, not only in America, but in a lot of places, once you do away with the fiat money and have real money, the golden age is going to go in lots of places. But unless you have stability, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point. Awesome. Well, I think we'll probably start to wind down here. If I could just get your closing thoughts on just maneuver warfare in general. I mean, I think the timing of this episode has been great because 2 weeks ago we had Burning Bright on to talk Righteous Russia. You had a fantastic conversation with him the night before on the narrative. I recommend everybody go to check that out. And then last week covered Assad, kind of did this similar thing after doing the origin story of Putin, did the origin story of Assad, and remains to be seen what that story really is, but it does in a lot of ways feel like a feint. And maybe we'll see him come back in some form. But yeah, if you wanted to give some closing thoughts on maneuver warfare and how it may apply to the 5th generation warfare we're in right now.
Yeah, well, I think maneuver warfare is a strategy that will go across just about any of the technology because it can be used. Again, you're just trying to move faster, take the initiative, have surprise. No matter what technology you're using, you can use those things. How you do it is going to change. The weapon systems you use may change. The tactics you use may change. But I think the concept of maneuver warfare is not going away anytime soon. And again, I don't think it's just in the military. I think that maneuver warfare is a great strategy for the business world. I think it's a great strategy for the political world. And I think you're seeing some of these leaders today using the maneuver warfare, trying to get inside the decision-making process loop of their enemy or their, doesn't have to be an enemy, their competitor. And I don't see that going away, and I think it's only going to get. I think the new technology that we're seeing and the new relationships in the world that we're seeing on the political side is going to increase that the importance of that maneuver warfare.
Absolutely, that's very, very well said. All right, well, let's hit. I think it looks like we have a few. We have a rant. Let's see. Sarasad. I don't think I'm saying that right. Excellent oak. Don't train to get it right. Train till you get it. Train till you can't get it wrong. Dan. I think he's signing it Dan. Is that a saying in the Army?
So there's a couple sayings. The one I always like is slow is smooth, smooth is fast.
I like that too.
And so, it doesn't matter if you do something fast. If it isn't trained into you, you won't do it fast when that comes. But the other piece is that you train to standard, not to time. So, when I used to have my soldiers and I'd take them out in the field on a day, and I told them, this is what we're going to do today. This is the training that we're going to do, and this is the standard. If we meet that standard at 3:00 in the afternoon, then we're done. If we don't meet it till 10 o'clock tonight, we're here till 10 o'clock tonight. It's up to you. You meet the standard and we're done. And until you meet the standard, we're not done.
I love that. That's awesome. That's great. Are y'all going to be in Plymouth this weekend?
Yeah, Kel and I will be in Plymouth. We're looking forward to it.
Yeah,
and I have a conference right after that I'm speaking at in Springfield, Massachusetts. So as soon as we're done with GART, then we'll go that way, and I'll talk about leadership and success at a conference.
Awesome. That's great. I don't have that as part of my official run sheet today, but absolutely, badlandsmedia.tv, go check /events, go check out the Plymouth GART 8 for a virtual ticket. I will be heading up there on Thursday. Really look forward to seeing y'all. Y'all going to be there on Thursday or on Friday?
Yeah, we'll be there Thursday. And one of the things I want to say is, if you're going in person, take advantage of being there. Come up and talk to the content creators. Talk to Ghost. Talk to Burning Bright. Talk to Chris Paul. If I'm standing there and you want to come ask me a question and talk to me, come up and talk to me. That's why we're there. And I'm not part of Badlands Media, but Kel and I are at a lot of them, and you just have to take advantage of being there. Don't be intimidated by any of us. We put our pants on just like everybody else.
I would 100% endorse that. I was actually terrified to speak to any of y'all before my first time. The first time they had me get up on stage, I wasn't officially like part of Badlands yet. John just asked me to join some panels, and I didn't even realize till I left the stage, because I think it was a religious panel. So we were talking about the Middle East, and I was talking about, oh yeah, I think like our greatest ally in the war against Satan would be the Muslims. And then, of course, I got off stage, and then somebody mentioned to me later, they're like, oh, yeah, I think there's a colonel here and maybe like a general as well. And I was like, oh, okay, well, these guys are probably about to tell me that I'm like a dumbass for what I just said. But yeah. So I was a little intimidated the first time, but it was great. And I would 100% encourage anyone who's there just to come up and talk to us, because that's the whole point of being there, is to have those interpersonal conversations.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, great, Oak. Thank you so much for being here tonight. This has been a great episode. We've accomplished exactly what I would hope we would accomplish by walking away from this conversation with some new lexicon, some new concepts in our head that we can then apply to future episodes as we're talking about these other storylines that are naturally going to become part of the show. Hope to have you back again for another discussion. And really
anytime you want me back, Ghost, you just got to ask.
Absolutely. And we will absolutely see you on Thursday in Plymouth. We look forward to that. So thanks again, everyone. Please hit the thumbs up and share this around. And we will see you next week for chapter 15. Everyone have a good night.